Hey everyone, this is Elijah K. Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and back with us today are one of our viewers' favorite guests, maybe our favorite guest, our viewers' favorite guest on the show, Andy Schectman from Miles Franklin. Thank you so much for joining us today, Andy, on this live stream.
Elijah, it's good to be here, bud. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it very much.
Well, it's great to have you today and this week as well. We love having you on every week, and it's great that you could come on this week. I know not the usual day, but hey, it's a live stream, so we really appreciate that. Now, what we've seen in the precious metal markets in the last few weeks, I know we've seen a bit of a pullback here. I guess the start off question is if we look really have a broad view here, a large view kind of over what is happening right now. Your perspective on this pullback, we've seen quite a run up, but now it's like, well, is our prices too high or is the bull market still going?
Yeah, I the mainstream media wants us to believe that it's China thinking the price is too high, so that they've stopped buying gold. And I look at this as one of the silliest premature conclusions I've ever seen. Um, First of all, no one has ever believed the numbers that China puts out. That's always been the conventional wisdom that they tell us they have 24, 25, 2,600 metric tons. Alistair McLeod believes they have 38,000 metric tons, over 5 times what we supposedly have at Fort Knox, which of course hasn't been audited since 1956. But it was always, you can never believe what they have, always. And you get this one report that shows that they've ceased buying for 1 month out of the last 20. And now all of a sudden, oh, the price is too high. The bull market's over. China's not buying anymore. I think it's crazy. I think it's foolish. And not only has China been buying for forever and not updating their numbers very frequently, we have no idea how much they own. They're also the largest producers in the world, and they've been producing at uneconomical price levels using our trade imbalance forever. So no, this is what this is, was a massive short position on COMEX, where the commercial banks were literally as extended as I've ever seen them. And so one would expect that there would be some sort of a pullback, hoodwinking the managed money into taking the other side of the trade. And, it's still well above its 200-day moving average. So there's still a little bit of room for it to correct. But no, this is not the end of a bull market. It is a correction within a market where, if you've been at this long enough, this is just part and parcel what to expect. But it's becoming far harder to do that in an environment where we're seeing such copious amounts of deliveries off of the exchanges. And 3-4 Fridays ago, we saw $500 million worth of gold bars be delivered to Brics Hong Kong, which many people believe is then trucked over to the Shanghai Gold Exchange and sold out because they purchase kilo bars, the mini contracts. So that's what the Shanghai Exchange trades. But you're seeing bleed downs in the COMEX and the LBMA, and also on the Shanghai Exchange. You're seeing countries like India bought 1.5 times the amount of gold in the first quarter of this year than they bought all of last year, and they just brought back 100 metric tons from the Bank of England, removing the counterparty risk. We see Saudi Arabia and Egypt and a half a dozen African countries bring all their gold back from the New York Fed. We are seeing central banks buy at levels like Turkey that the world has never seen. In fact, the amount of gold that the central banks hold is as much as just before Nixon closed the gold window. It's almost as if they are preparing for some form of a gold standard. So, no, this is not the end of any gold bull market. What it is, it's more of the same thing, the stupidity of manipulating and rehypothecating both LBMA and COMEX contracts to drive the price down to maybe buy themselves some more time, or to help cover their short positions that are growing very tenuous and bleeding them dry, them being the big bullion banks. So yeah, I think this is just a correction amidst a primary bull market. And it won't be an easy run. It will be volatile. The bull wants to throw as many people off its back as possible. So have strong fingertips. Look at this as a subsidy, the way that the central banks do. And so no, this is nothing other than normal correction within a volatile bull market, precious metals, which typically are far more volatile than the other markets that we would normally talk about.
You mentioned that story about China pausing its gold purchases, and in reality, how the official holdings by China are probably very underreported.
Right.
Now, I did want to ask you about this whole narrative that you've been talking about, this whole story about the BRICS, right? Emerging as kind of rivaling the G7 and moving more into gold. We did just see another story out today about the G7 using Russian assets against Russia, right? They seized Russian assets, and now I don't understand all the details about it, but something about like that the profit from those assets they're gonna now loan to Ukraine for war against Russia. So it just seems like it's more of this, I guess, idea that you can just, when you have the world reserve currency, right, you can freeze assets. And half of the world is looking at this and saying, this is not a good idea. So, what is your perspective on the reaction the East is going to have by this? To this decision by the G7.
It's so stupid, man. You can't make it up. The House, first of all, the House of Representatives approved the confiscation of frozen Russian assets. We have about 5 billion in the US. There's 280 billion or so in the EU, but they approved the confiscation of said frozen assets and their transfer to the Ukraine. I mean, you can't make it up. Where China and Saudi Arabia and every other country, as you mentioned, in the Southern Hemisphere that holds our treasuries, well, they're thinking, well, what the hell? Do we want to continue to hold these treasuries that can be confiscated and given to the country that they're in a war against? I mean, it's as stupid gets, really. It's not our prerogative. The world views us as being completely hypocritical, where we can make these rules and the rules don't apply to us. We can invade Iraq under the guise of weapons of mass destruction, not find any, destroy their country, topple their regime, put in a new government, and we're still there 20 years later, sanctioning 14 of their banks and controlling their natural resource revenue. 90 billion they made last year. I talk about this all the time. They asked us for a billion of the 90. We said, come back to us in a few months. Not a good time right now. So, they're in the process of kicking the coalition forces out of the country. They made trading in dollars illegal. As you know, if you own a business, you'll go to jail. They don't have green bills in the country anymore. All the banks got rid of them as of January 1, and they officially applied to Brics. So the world looks at us as being hypocritical. We can do this stuff. We can give the Ukraine 200 billion, and to your point here, the G7 is going to make them a loan for another 50 billion backed on as collateral the Russian frozen assets with no congressional oversight, and that's okay. But as Janet Yellen said to CNBC 2 weeks ago, China, we're okay with you being friends with Russia, but you give one penny to the war machine, and we will sanction your companies, your banks, and Beijing itself. The hypocrisy that the world looks at us and then these types of stupidity laden decisions, you can't make up. And what else would we expect then for MBS, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, has just turned down an invitation to attend the G7 meeting? That's interesting. So when you talk about the ramifications of making these stupid moves, yeah, they're real. And it just incentivizes the de-dollarization, the de-treasurization, and it's coming from a country that's bankrupt. We are accumulating, as people who watch your show know by now, $1 trillion of debt every 100 days. We're bankrupt, we're insolvent, we're viewed as hypocritical. We go around the world making these declarations, these sanctions, and now these confiscations, which will only shatter the trust that this country has built over however many hundreds of years to be, the beacon of justice and free markets and liberty and doing the right thing. And yet it just seems as though we continue to make boneheaded blunders, this being one of them. It is not our prerogative to say this. It is not our prerogative to steal this stealing, all right? This isn't just freezing. This is stealing another country's reserves. And what makes it exponentially more disgusting is using the proceeds to fund a war that the country they stole from is fighting. It's not right, and it's not our position to do this. And I'm not making any statement on war or who's right or who's wrong, but as the world reserve currency, you should be neutral, and you should not be in the business of saying you can use it and you can't, especially when the rules don't seem to apply to us. Not a good thing, Elijah.
Now, we do have a question about central bank digital currency here from Jake. He asks, ask Andy about the new information about mBridge, which I understand is kind of a a lot of CBDCs on a platform working together. So your perspective on your latest or perspective on the latest
We had
developments there.
talked about mBridge maybe 2 years ago when it first came out, a year and a half, 2 years ago, and it's a coalition or collaboration, I should say, between the central banks of China, Hong Kong, Thailand, and the UAE. And I find it interesting, first and foremost, that what it is, it's a cross-border digital payment system that allows these countries to trade their local digital currencies with one another outside of the SWIFT system. So there's no SWIFT interference. And the first two test trades were done at the end of last year, 2023. The first one was using yuan, and I think it was with the UAE, digital yuan to buy oil. It was a cross-border oil purchase. The second one was a cross-border gold purchase. Now, if you ask me, commodities like gold and oil have been remonetized across the globe. They have become more valuable than the currencies that are purchasing them. This is Zoltan Pozar's Bretton Woods 3, where commodities rule the day. And I find it interesting that that is the case. Now, I thought it was a big deal when it came out, and I talked a lot about it when it first came out, because this is a way for them to sidestep the sanctions. The sanctions are largely SWIFT related, right? So there was an article that just came out last week, June 5th. Saudi Arabia has joined a China-dominated central bank digital currency cross-border trial in what would be another step towards less of the world's oil trade being done in US dollars. The move announced by the BIS on Wednesday will see Saudi Arabia's central bank become a full participation of Project mBridge, a full participant of Project mBridge. And so, look, they decided to not go to the G7 meeting. They're now a full participant in the Project mBridge. We already know about the Brics. We know about the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. All of the OPEC countries are on the Belt Road. You can see this stuff is starting to take shape. And I thought James Rickards had a very interesting take recently on why they haven't issued their common settlement currency. And I have to agree with it. And intuitively, this is what we've really said for a long time. But the way he explained it, I think, is worth just noting here. And that he said, look, there's 10 countries now, the five original plus Saudi Arabia, Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Egypt. And so if they had a common settlement currency, even if it were pegged to gold or whatever, selling or buying from one of the 10 members with the common settlement currency, with the proceeds, you would want to use it to buy something. So you only have 9 other countries to shop with. Well, there was just a meeting that happened, as we've talked about on this show ad nauseum. There were going to be 200 meetings between the beginning of the year and the big Brics meeting in October. And they just came out with a report here of a meeting that happened it's called NIZHNY, Nizhny Novgorod. And there was a meeting that just came out, and there were 54-point summation article that I read. And I'm just going to highlight a couple of them here. One is that this was just a couple days ago. 21,000 people attended from 139 nations. 78,000 in bilateral deals were signed on the sidelines, meaning I'm going to trade with my local currency and your local currency. We won't use the dollar. And most of these deals are now not putting their reserves, the excess, into treasuries. They're putting them into gold. But the third one is the big one, and that is 59 nations plan to join Brics. This just came out of this meeting the other day. And so if you have 59 countries to trade with in common settlement, you can go shopping in 59 countries instead of 10. When they get this critical mass, a large enough group of countries that are now approaching, you add 59 countries on here, you bring in the Shanghai Cooperation and the Eurasian Economic Union, which you keep hearing about, it will happen. And then look at the Belt Road Initiative, you're talking 90% of human population. And so when you have more and more and more countries signing on to the Brics, 59 countries have planned to join, you have the ability to issue a common settlement currency. It doesn't have to be a reserve currency. That's where gold can come in. Gold has outpaced the bond market since the beginning of the century handily, many times over, but it lacks the counterparty risk that we find in treasuries that, as of today, can now be confiscated. The EU plans on taking the interest from the frozen assets in the European Union and using those to act as collateral and whatnot, and towards giving a $50 million loan to the Ukraine, using frozen assets. They're stealing another country's assets. It's wrong, and it's going to have ramifications. And this is what is incentivizing the coalition of all of these countries to move away from the hypocrisy, the hegemony, and the threat of confiscation of assets or sanctioning of assets at the worst, the least, if we do not align ideologically with those countries. And it's about as foolhardy as one could get. And the mBridge is just another way for them to continue to de-dollarize and to do transactions that can't be sanctioned and can't be attacked by the SWIFT, to do transactions that give them the ability to maneuver outside of the SWIFT channels.
I'm reminded of an interview I did with Rafi Farber, our good friend at the Endgame Investor. And one of the points that he made, which I thought it was really interesting, I'd love your take on this, is that we're seeing, the rise of the Brics. We're seeing the dollar still as the dominant world reserve currency. And a lot of people have said, well, it's going to fade, but we're still in the best position. His take is actually being the world reserve currency in this situation is not a good position to be in. It's actually the worst position because so many dollars are outside the US. And when the world turns on the US dollar, all those dollars will come back faster than before. And we'll see an increase in the money supply more rapidly than any other currency would see. Your perspective on that, is the dollar being a reserve currency actually a benefit in this situation, or could it actually be a drawback?
That's exactly what I've been saying on your show for over 3 years now, that when the switch is flipped, and that's why I like the term little by little by little by little, but then all at once, logarithmic decay. The little by little you can see, and I'll show you that here in 1 second, but you can see the little by little in all of these bilateral deals that are being struck and using the mBridge and selling treasuries and buying gold. That's the little by little by little. And yes, the all at once, every country in the world has had to stockpile dollars for 50 years. It was 50 years last week that the deal was signed, in order to buy oil. And if everyone had no incentive to ever hold those dollars again, the dumping of those dollars, this is the great reset I talk about, would create hyperinflation as that tsunami of dollars hit our shore, overwhelm the issuer, the US, creating hyperinflation. And the byproduct of hyperinflation is to see interest rates rise to compensate, not directed by the Fed or Powell, who doesn't want to do that and blow everything up. But if the market does it, we now have a villain to point to. Those guys dump the dollar. They're not taking the dollar for oil any longer. It's Xi Jinping and Putin and OPEC and Saudi Arabia. How could they do this to us? Well, forget about the fact that we signed an executive order to go green, or that our bonehead, knucklehead, embarrassing lead economic advisor, who embarrassed himself horribly in that video that circulated around Twitter for the last few weeks about him trying to explain money creation and bond sales. His whole theory is to lose the reserve status. And when we talk about the share of reserves, as of just a couple of days ago, gold share of global international reserves has jumped to 17.6% in 2023, the most in 27 years. The share has almost doubled since 2016 as central banks ramp up purchase. But here's the interesting part. Gold is now the second largest asset held in global central bank reserves, exceeding the euro for the first time ever. The number one is still the US dollar, but its 48% world share is down from 60%. Meanwhile, the central bank's net gold purchases saw a record in Q1 2024. They're selling dollars, they're selling euro, they're selling treasuries, and they are buying gold, which can't be sanctioned. And so, yeah, the all at once hasn't happened yet. But how hard would it be for OPEC to say we're done taking dollars for oil? That's the rumor that's been circulating around the internet, that the petrodollar deal wasn't renewed. Now, I would be the first one to scream that from the rooftops, but I haven't seen any official acknowledgement of that yet. So I'm not going to run with it, other than to say a lot of people are saying it's already happened. I don't know if I can believe that or not. I never saw a 50-year timeline on the original agreement, nor have I seen any official statements from Saudi Arabia or the US. But I'll tell you one thing. We did see the United Arab Emirates say we don't want to take dollars anymore, and they're the seventh largest producer of oil in the world, and an OPEC member, and we're admitted into Brics alongside Saudi Arabia. So to imagine an environment where the world dumps dollars because they're no longer needed for oil purchases, as every OPEC country is on the Belt Road, and all of these countries are moving away from this country because of sanctions and because of our behavior and because we're going green. So what do they need to work with us for? A currency where we've obviously chosen inflation over austerity and a bond market that's been volatile as hell for the last couple of years. So yeah, time to move. And it's the safety in numbers. And if indeed we did see that moment, and Rafi is right, the all at once moment where dollars are forsaken because you don't need them for oil anymore. And to his point, every country in the world's had to stockpile them for 50 years. Yeah, the ramifications or the result would be disastrous because you would see interest rates spike to compensate for that hyperinflation. And all of the assets in this country, stocks, bonds, real estate, and even the banks, which are over leveraged and undercapitalized, and the insurance companies are loaded with treasuries, they're all inversely related or correlated or valued to a massive spike in interest rates. So, yeah, it would be disastrous and it would happen very quickly.
Now, we do have a viewer's question here, which is very interesting. I never thought of this before, actually. You're talking about the US rejecting the US dollar. A client was asking me the other day, and this is the question. If someone has a US gold eagle, right, it's a legal tender, it's US dollars, right, technically speaking. I know they mentioned how Iraq has actually outlawed transactions and withdrawals in US dollars. Um, do you think there would be any issue with taking a gold eagle or using it in barter in maybe some of these countries that are not favorable to the US dollar? And I guess that goes with that, the question could be expanded for really, if maybe if you have a Chinese coin and somewhere, outlaws the yuan or something like that, your perspective on that, do you think that would be ever an issue for sovereign
I
minted
mean,
bullion?
I would. I've thought about it before. I mean, maybe the U.S. is a pariah. No one wants anything with Lady Liberty on it. I don't know that that would be the case in the United States, but it could be certainly in the Middle East. And maybe people in Canada would rather own the maple leaf rather than anything else. People in the U.S. would rather own the eagle, but I don't think it would have such a daunting effect on the eagles here in North America. But you go on websites. I was just in London and I stopped into Sharps Pixley, and they sell eagles there, and they're in the UK. So who knows? I would just simply say that yeah, if the United States was viewed that negatively across the globe, uh, God help us if so. Let's hope it doesn't happen. But if that were the case, yeah, I mean, maybe they wouldn't want anything with Lady Liberty on it. While it's the most sought after coin in the US, may not be the case in the rest of the world. And it's just like the Philharmonic being the most widely distributed coin in Europe. And obviously in Australia, it's the kangaroo. And in the UK, it's the Britannia. Not to say you can't get other coins, but I think the regional aspect, the image on the world stage certainly could have an effect outside the U.S. But yeah, I think it's if people are holding it in other countries, sure, it could be that we don't want anything with the U.S. stamp on it. But here again, these what if questions are always kind of hard to answer. You just have to suspend your imagination. But I could see that. I wouldn't expect to see it in the U.S., but in other parts of the world, sure, why not? If we actually make people that upset, it would make sense.
I think, yeah, I mean, it's important to understanding these what if questions is to kind of think about out the possibilities. And I guess worst case scenario is you just melt it down, right? You could always do that. So I wouldn't be too worried about the stamp. And I think the US is still at the moment, the US coins are still the most favored when it comes to bullion. And if worst came to worst, you could melt it down for the melt value.
At least in North America, they are. So yeah, but you can always trade them too, wherever the people are, trade them into something that's more local. So I don't know that I would recommend doing that, but here in the States, I don't think people have much to worry about with that.
No, when it comes to, I guess, the geopolitical conflicts we see right now, we do have a viewer's question on really the escalation in the Russia Ukraine conflict right now. Peter is wanting to know, do you think the US will back down in Ukraine before they push Russia into nuclear World War III? And I think this has been, things have been somewhat. It seems like over the last few weeks or so, very escalating as the U.S. has been using, or the Ukraine has been using U.S. weapons now into Russia. Your perspective on that, the latest developments there?
I mean, here again, all of this stuff I keep saying is too stupid to be stupid. God help us if they do push them into a nuclear war. I live in southern Florida, and you got nuclear powered submarines 60 miles off the coast of Palm Beach. And so when you talk about it being real, sure, it's real. But how can you blame the Russians? Now try to suspend your feelings on all of this stuff. You know, the way that we are provoking them, we are stealing their $300 billion in assets and using it to fund the war. We've already given them 200 billion in assets, including our weapons, including all of our surveillance and intel, and it is all but a declaration of war. Just because we're not the ones on the ground doesn't mean we're not involved in it, and this is why you often hear it being called a proxy war. Uh, I think it's horrible. I think what we are doing is about as stupid as can be. And it just goes part and parcel with our administration doing stupid things here at home, stupid things abroad, stupid things in monetary and fiscal policy. I mean, it's just, you can't make it up how stupid things have become. And this administration will go down as the worst in history. No question about it. And the fact that they would antagonize and provoke, and at the same time say we're going to support, Taiwan, and in essence provoke China, throw more tariffs on China. I mean, this behavior that we have is getting very old by many of these other countries, and let's just hope they're not foolish enough to push us into a hot war with a country like Russia or China. It's incomprehensible, actually. And when you think about all of the things that have happened, Elijah, I mean, 17 million people in this country illegally, questioning of the judicial system and the electoral system, provoking nuclear powered or nuclear armed countries. Two of the three largest nuclear arsenals in the world were poking them, going around and seizing and stealing money from these countries. Everything we are doing, everything, go all the way back to when I started talking with you and your dad in 2020, and the censorship and the cancel culture and the wokeness and the break from the nuclear family, all of these things that little by little, then bang, it's all in your face. I mean, that little by little all at once happens. It's apropos for things that we've seen over the last few years. Like, these things weren't part of the fabric of this country when I was a kid. And now all of a sudden, right in your face, little by little, then bam, this is what we see. And it's everywhere. And the stupidity of the current administration, and ranging from the breakup of the nuclear family, the wokeness, the merit-based society being thrown to the wind in favor of gender and sexual preference and these kinds of things. And I mean, you can't make it up. And then you look at the elections, you look at the border, you look at the lawlessness, you look at all of these things, and then we see arrests being made last night or the night before for eight terrorists suspected of being Islamic terrorists that want to set off bombs in this country. What do you expect? We've let 17 million people in this country. 1% want to mess with this country. It's 170,000 people. That's a standing army, let alone 5 or 10%. And you can't make it up. So everything that we are doing, and it puts whipped cream on a stupid sundae when you start. And I don't blame Russia for feeling the way that they do against our provoking and our meddling and our interference. If we just would have listened to Thomas Jefferson way back when and just closed our borders, stop meddling in other people's affairs, build our infrastructure with our military, protect our country, fortify our border, stop messing in the 700 or 800 military bases around the country that are bleeding us dry, just like it did the Romans. The more things change, the more they stay the same. And if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat its mistakes. And that's what we're doing right now, only much worse when you're dealing with, instead of, weapons that they had in World War II, we're dealing with hypersonic missiles that are 60 miles off the coast of Florida. This is just ridiculous. And hopefully cooler heads prevail. Hopefully we see a change in the administration. And I'll tell you, I don't even know if Trump can fix things. I don't know if we've shattered our trust globally, even where he could come and fix. God help us if this administration somehow retains power. You might as well, put your head between your legs and brace for impact. I mean that. And I not a political guy, but when you see these things, the continued provocation against Russia, and if it were the other way around and Russia was doing this to us, there would be hell to pay. And you know it. Everyone knows it. We look at it from one perspective. If it were the other way around, well, the drums of war would be beating, but we're just meddling in affairs that we should have nothing to do with, and the ramifications will be real. And it starts with de-dollarization and de-treasurization. It's a whole nother thing when you get into escalation into war with a country that could do some serious damage to this country. And we've never been invaded like that. We've never had the threat of weapons hitting our country, and God forbid. But look how normal it is for us to see us involved in wars around the world, and to provoke these countries who have the ability to retaliate in a very substantial way is just stupid.
I think, as we talk about these big developments in the country and around the world, it can be a bit overwhelming sometimes, but it's good to remember that, there are specific action items that, we can check off our list and saying we want to opt out of this system in certain ways. I know myself and yourself have moved to different, states to kind of escape the craziness. And also, it's important to realize that we can, build community, build our own family and think about, traditional values and all those kinds of things. But when it comes to finances as well, we can opt out of the system as we talk about so much on this channel. And every week you give us an opportunity to really see what are some of the values out there for people interested in opting out of the system and moving into real assets. I'll put on the screen here, but if you want to remind our viewers what the specials are this week, we have first the Kilo Silver Bar, if you can tell us a bit about that from Etel
You know
Precios.
something I've been saying since November, December on your show, that it's beyond baffling to me how the premiums on the coins have been so low and the availability is so good. And you can vouch for me that all of a sudden you see the prices and the availability, all of a sudden the coins are becoming hard to get again. And just like that, they're becoming very hard to get. All the backdated stuff that everyone was choking on is now gone, and you're going to have delivery delays again. So buying the kilo bars here again, not only will it be the least expensive way, not too big, 32.15 ounces, maybe just smaller than an iPhone, but a better value than paying high premiums, but for immediate delivery, because all of a sudden the coins, the Maples, the Britannias, the Philharmonics, the Krugerrands, all of a sudden they're hard to get. And how does that play out over the coming weeks and months? Don't know. But so we've chosen to go with the kilo bar, which is probably the least expensive way, while at the same time not compromising your liquidity. 32.15 ounces is still bigger than a 1 ounce coin or fractional coin that you would trade with, but not too big for me to recommend as a way to very cost efficiently build your silver stack.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a low premium, and that's the interesting thing is even though we're seeing decrease in supply of the coins, them getting harder to get, we're still seeing relatively low premiums across the board, except for the Eagles.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about that? It seems like over really since COVID, all premiums have been elevated. They went extremely high during the banking crisis last year, but since then they've really come down and stayed pretty low.
Yeah, and it's something I don't really understand. I mean, when Silicon Valley Bank failed and Signature Bank, we added 14,000 clients in 45 days. There was an awakening. You see another bank failure, and we've been told that there will be. We've been told that, that there are banks that are hanging on by a thread. Recently, they just came out and said that there's 63 problem banks and 517 billion in unrealized losses. Numbers are probably much higher than that, but yeah, all of a sudden everything is okay, and the soft landing is coming, and everything is going to be just fine. Don't worry about it. Nvidia is going to the moon, as is Bitcoin, and so what you have seen, if you look at the ETFs, the amount of metal held in the ETFs in the U.S., they've fallen down at a 45-degree angle. Now, my good buddy and our mutual friend Bill Holter would say a lot of that is the draining of the ETFs by the authorized participants, which is more opaque than taking delivery off of COMEX. And maybe some of that is true, but what it also represents is divestment by the public. They have been selling into this rally They've been selling coins into this rally. They've been selling ETF participation into this rally, whether it be because inflation is so high that they need money or that they're chasing things that are showing greater return, like Nvidia, like Bitcoin, which have been impressive. You have to admit it. But at the same time, we see the central banks buying at levels the world has never seen. We see the ETFs in China being triggered stops. We're seeing triggered stops and circuit breakers triggered to the upside. So as we're selling, the big investors in particular, that the central banks are buying at record levels, and the Chinese populace is buying at record levels. So yeah, it's always confused me when the world seems to be scarier from my perspective, more disjointed and out of control and messed up, at least here domestically. And of course, the way we're handling our affairs around the world, people in this country, even those that are well read, are reading the wrong stuff, and they're not seeing what I believe is a very important time in our country's history to be a contrarian. If you're not a contrarian, you're destined to go broke. If you're everything you hold is in U.S. dollars, you're destined, to become a victim for sure. And I just think that it's interesting that through all of this craziness, the public has missed it. And now you're beginning to see those coins disappear. And what happens when there is some event that rattles the public? Rick Rule, and we've been saying this on your show, and I've heard him say it on your show, and he's told me personally that he believes that the entire allocation of metals from Joe and Jane six pack all the way up to the Harvard Endowment Fund in the US is 0.5%. What happens if it goes to 5% because something rattles the public? That's a tenfold increase. Gone. Just like that. Everything will be gone. And so I've always said that's what my anticipation is, or my view looking way out into the future, what the market looks like. High prices, but characterized by people like you and I as difficulty getting product, characterized by the people outside the door who just watch from the periphery, don't own any, but they will be so high that it's too high, I'm not going to buy it anymore. We're a long way from that moment happening, but I do think that it's a massive contrarian indicator, and I've said that on your show, that um, the public has missed this, and these low premiums and this great availability. Well, now the great availability is gone, and the premiums will follow next. They'll follow the Silver Eagle. The best value, in my opinion, bar none, is pre-65 constitutional silver by far. Because if you go back during the pandemic, it was the second highest priced item across the board, right under Silver Eagles. And now it fell so hard during all of this, and we got such a decent inventory that premiums have not moved up with the other coins. In fact, they are as low as most of my career. If you are looking for the one form of silver that has not moved up with the sovereign mint coins, in fact, and if you go back and look at the last 3 years, was higher substantially than all the sovereign coins, it's pre-65 silver. It's the best value there is right now, period, because it was the second highest premiumed item for 3 years during the pandemic next to Silver Eagles, and now it's probably the best value, the lowest premium. So that would be my number one choice. But yeah, the Eagles moving higher is emblematic of them being the model of inefficiency. And if you go back, people go back and watch the 3-part interview between Bix Weir and Jack Sermon, the guy that developed the Silver Eagle program, he admits, I mean, it was crazy. It's right up there next to Chris Marcus's interview with Bart Chilton in terms of significance, where he admitted he was told by his superiors to just produce enough Silver Eagles to not create a revolt and a backlash by the public. And he said that in 2022, I think, the authorized participants came to him and said, we'll take another 36 million Eagles, and they only gave him 12 million. They're supposed to take or produce as many Eagles as is demanded. That's part of the law that was used to develop this program in '86, and they're not living up to that. So the Eagle premium is a representative of the mint being inefficient, but the junk silver, it's an anomaly right now in comparison to where it's been. So that would be my number one choice for people looking for a really good value.
It does seem like we could be seeing the calm before the storm right now. I know just personally, the number of calls like in late May, like almost nothing. Business was, way down. There weren't many sales, and then just in the last couple weeks, we've seen quite a bit of an increase there. I don't know your perspective on kind of what we've been seeing at Miles Franklin, the sort of business we've been seeing over the last couple weeks, and what that uh, might predict for the
Yeah,
coming
you
months.
are witness. I mean, you can feel it. We're feeling a resumption of demand and interest. And there's so many reasons why people should be interested. There's so many reasons why people should be concerned. And there's an ebb and flow to it, no question about it. Um, all I can simply say is that since December of last year, really, until just recently, the I guess if I could generalize it, it would seem that people were more concerned about return on their investment and rather than return of it. And so selling into the rally either to pay bills or because the world has gotten so expensive or to chase assets that are throwing off a higher return like Nvidia or Bitcoin. I understand that they've been rather shocking in the amount of gain that we've seen and how fast it's happened. But Richard Russell, my mentor, once said, if you made 7% a year, you're a rock star. Well, gold has averaged 9.5, 9.9% per year for the last 25 years. Quietly, it has outpaced just about everything, with the exception of Bitcoin. It's outpaced everything, and people don't notice it. It's not sexy enough. It doesn't move fast enough, and so people have moved elsewhere. But that's changing, and I think we see a lot of larger orders, which to me are people who are taking the time to understand what's happening in the world, versus the multitude of smaller orders that we would see during Silicon and Signature failure, where or going back to Silver Squeeze, all the people who jumped in trying to squeeze the bullion banks and just like AMC and GameStop and make this profit. Now, you don't buy metal to profit. I would be lying if I said I wasn't aware of it, as is anyone who holds it. But you buy it because of the madness that we see in monetary and fiscal policy and the irresponsibility of the decisions that are being made by our leaders. And this is why you own it. You own it because it is wealth that has outlived everything the world's thrown at it. And so a lot of people, I think, were just, disenchanted. They held on for a long time. They bought it in 2021 in February and March and watched it ride down for 3 years in the midst of the craziest crap you've ever seen. And now it finally gets to a level where they can get out and reallocate it to Bitcoin or Nvidia. Yeah, I'm sure there were a lot of people who did that. It'll be a big mistake, but that's normal. Most people are moved by their emotions rather than their logic, and that's an emotional decision. It's not a logical one, in my opinion.
Well, Andy, we really appreciate you taking the time today, giving us this update about, Brink's bullion and everything in between. So Brics, bullion, and everything in between there. So we really appreciate your time. Before we let you go, did you want to share with the viewers any last thoughts you had?
I don't know. I think I'm pretty an open book on my thoughts, and people I think understand where I'm coming from, and I would just simply say this is not an end of the bull market. It is a correction. It's a subsidy. And when you see a country like India purchase 1.5 times the amount of gold that they bought all of last year in the first quarter, but then bring it home from the Bank of England, 100 metric tons. When you see Saudi Arabia and Egypt bring their gold, and a half a dozen African countries bring their gold home from the New York Federal Reserve, when you see all of this action that centers around accumulation and repatriation, I think it is telling where this ultimately goes. So much so that the level of gold held by the world central banks right now is just above where it was right before Nixon closed the gold window. And it's almost as if these countries understand that they are preparing for some sort of a gold standard, which the BIS reclassified as the world's only other tier one reserve asset. So when you realize that we've seen accumulation and repatriation under the guise or under the opaque cover of Western central bank manipulation, they're using it against us. And do as they are doing, not as the rhetoric from the Western media, like Yahoo News and Reuters and all of these things talking about, well, it's too high, China's out of the market now, and all this nonsense. Tune it out and look at these pullbacks as a subsidy. And I mean that completely and totally, because I think before it's all said and done, gold and silver will be wickedly higher. But that really means that the dollar has fallen much more. And in an environment where we've proven to the world that holding the dollars in our treasuries, which have been the key to our supremacy, our hegemony, and our standard of living, is dangerous. That's something that will have consequences. The question, really, to me, is was it intended or not? The speech I'm giving at Rick Rule's conference, the first one, is something. It's a little bit more political, but what I wanted it to be was, is it too stupid to be stupid? And I've changed it a little bit, but the theme is the same thing. All of these things we talk about, use your gut. I mean, do you not feel that the world has just gotten stupid? And is it too stupid to be stupid, or are they trying to reset this system? And I'll leave that up to all of you. But the more I see, including the provoking Russia and stealing their money and making everyone in the world who holds our treasuries and dollars think, Jesus, this is a wise decision, is about as stupid as it gets, on top of everything else we see here at home. So, yeah, buckle up. The Chinese curse says, may you live in interesting times. Elijah, since I've known you, the first time Elijah interviewed me, all you out there, he was living at home as a 17-year-old kid. I've known Elijah for a long time. And since I've known you, I've never been more concerned as a father of three kids for what's coming. And I hope when I meet my maker someday and he says, what did you do for the world? I'll look at him with a straight face and say, I tried my best to help. Yeah, I ran a business, but I tried to do the best I could, not only to build a successful business and for my family, but also to help as many people as I could. And I love coming on your show because you and your father and your brother, who I think the world of, I think are trying to do the same thing. So it's an honor to be here. I love our weekly conversations, and I look forward to picking up where we left off next week. But I'm sure there'll be a lot to talk about in the span of just a few days. And that's really kind of the hallmark of where we are right now, where things are spinning faster and faster and faster. Buckle up. We're not too far away from the big Brics meeting and the biggest election in our lives. To think that there won't be lots to talk about and lots to think about between now and then, I think is foolish. So thank you for allowing me to have a platform to discuss. And I couldn't be more honored to do it with you and your family. And we'll just keep riding shotgun and seeing how this all plays out.
Right back, Andy. Right back at you, Andy. Thank you so much for your time today. God bless, and we'll see you next Tuesday.
See you guys.